Onion Cycles podcast is about thought provoking, emotion evoking, action driven, step by step guidance to explore the unique, glorious, and wonderful ocean of your being. Because healing is a multi layered process of getting to know oneself. Become the self empowered empiric researcher by discovering the unique layers of your existence. With your host, Nadine Alma, welcome to the Holistic Healing Hub. Welcome to the Onion Cycles podcast. Hello, and a warm welcome to all of you out there, my beloved fellow healing, integrating onions. I welcome you back to this space of vulnerability where we are able to invest some of our time and energy into ourself. We are exploring the depth that is us, the fragments that make up the kaleidoscope of us. And we do that to know ourselves because that is the only way to be able to have a clear picture of who we are, who we can be, who we want to be, and the life we want to lead. And in doing so, we are doing the noble work, the hard work, the work that will lead us to be beacons of light to others, to see that change is scary, yes, but change is the only way to growth. To all of you new out there, thank you so much for tuning in. We have a worksheet that contains all the notes of every episode, and this worksheet is available for a free download on my website www.wonderfinder.org. Without further ado, hello my self-empiric researchers, welcome to Story 40, Episode 41, Grief. A little disclaimer before we start. I drew the inspiration for this episode from my own life, from things that happened to me personally, obviously, as the whole podcast revolves around the experience that I can pass on, the things that I'm working through, have worked through, going back to work through. But this specifically came to me as something very important because I thought after our last few episodes and starting our last quarter of the year together, it is important to realize that all the change we undergo doesn't go without grief. I haven't really toppled the topic of grief yet, and it presented itself very clearly to me just a couple weeks ago when I realized that inevitably, once we are fully embarked on this journey, with change comes grief, because the old dies so that the new can be reborn. I draw from lovely, inspiring people you may or may not have heard of yourself. For one, obviously, Matthew Hussey and his video on YouTube, Your Heartbreak Will Get Better, after you watched this video. I will link that in the description. And I obviously draw from my own life experience as well. Without further ado, let's start. Let's dive in. The topics I want to cover in this episode are the 5 stages of grief, the 6th hidden stage of grief, and what Matthew Hussey calls heartbreak. And so he connects heartbreak with grief, and that will be the 3rd pillar of our episode. So, the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, sadness or depression, bargaining, and acceptance. Well, the words are programmed. So we have in the stage of denial the refusal to accept the truth because it protects us from the consequences this loss of something or someone has created for our life and ourselves. Denial gives us room to breathe. And that is very important because denial as a form of protective layer until our inner world can cope with what the outer world will come to be presenting to us is a very important stage, and therefore should not really be seen as something unnecessary at all. Usually, after denial comes anger, the frustration, the resentment, the anxiety, the blaming ourselves, the blaming of others. And this again is sort of shielding us from the underlying pain that slowly is building up, that is bubbling beneath the surface, that is sort of hidden underneath that anger. It's an anger that makes us feel less vulnerable. And after all, anger is a bodyguard for pain, isn't it? We had a lovely episode concerning our emotions and the 5 core emotions that we have. We also dove into anger when we did the Being Human series, anger and wrath as being something very important that always points us to where our boundaries have been violated, where we need to step into action for something we believe in, where we are able to conjure up the strength to assist someone who can't stand up for themselves. So in that way, anger again is an absolute necessity of a stage when it comes to dealing with loss and dealing with grief. We then go on to sadness, depression, and bargaining. The reason why they are counted as 3 and 4, but I, for my own sake, think they can be sort of intertwined and also come in a different order, is because they're quite connected to each other in a way. Of course, we have the sadness and depression where all the sorrow and all the despair of what we have lost, what could have been, is causing a withdrawal from the world. It's withdrawing from others, may also be withdrawing from the self that is slowly presenting itself under the surface, the self that is able to deal with all of this, that self that is articulating itself in the world still. And I believe this withdrawal from everything is there to sort of leave energy that is required to work underneath the surface. Often in our life, we feel like we need to do more, we need to be more, we need to create more, or whatever it is that we need to do more of. And we forget that rest and that the sense of being tired and being exhausted doesn't necessarily come from a place of having done so much physically. On a daily basis, we are confronted with so much emotionally, spiritually, energetically. Everything comes from the outside, and sometimes things work within that we don't yet understand, that we don't even realize. They're unconscious. So I feel like sadness and depression is a very clear sign of our inner world telling us that we have done something for so long, we forgot that we need to look at it, and in not looking at it, we offered more energy to the oppression and suppression of those emotions that needed to be worked on, worked through, thought about, and acted through with letting go, that we actually used up all the energy available to us. So then depression comes up and says, well, that's it. That was really all we had to give, and now we shut you down physically. You're not able to do anything else but rest. You rest so deeply that you don't even feel rested anymore, because underneath we're doing all the work to bring up to the surface, finally for once, so that you can work through it. And the bargaining that spills into that sort of stage is when we say, all right, I make myself do something in order to get somewhere. It's also sort of attempt to regain control back. It's seeking outside for solutions that just lie within, and it's trying to reverse the irreversible. In a way, those two, to me personally, are interconnected. And that said, also, grief is so unique. It's an individual way of working through something. So, because of the uniqueness of it, the nature of grief to each one of us is unique as well. So, it's not always linear, and sometimes we go back and forth. Sometimes we start with a different stage and we're not in denial, we go straight to anger. And I believe the only thing that is really, well, dangerous, if you want, is if we get stuck in one of those stages and don't move on because we're too attached to what we've come to learn and who we've become in that stage that we don't move on from it. So we covered denial, we covered anger, bargaining, and sadness. Now, then comes acceptance. And that is when we finally come to terms with the reality of things. That doesn't mean we forget the grief or we are out of those stages or we never go back to any of those stages again. It just means that we have realized that the only way forward is to integrate. Integration meaning honoring the memories and realizing that life does go on. But it doesn't stop there. Yes, usually in the grand scheme of information, you find denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and acceptance as the 5 stages of grief. But personally, and through a workshop I did with Tony Robbins, I've come to realize that after that actually comes a 6th stage, and that is what I want to talk to you about today as well, and that is creation. So, obviously, we have talked so much about emotions, and that is because emotional patterns shape our reality, they shape our life in essence. Once we come out of those 5 stages, there is this inner battle going on that sometimes even shows in the outside world. It is the realization that is either conscious or unconscious about how you're not who you were and how your life isn't what it was and how you can't go back to what you were and to who you were and to what your life looked like. So, out of these stages comes creating something new as an inevitability of grief, a result of the loss of something or someone. And out of that, I believe all of the months past that we worked through come in handy to realize that no matter what happens in the outside world, once you realize that there are things you can control, especially when you feel crushed, that is what gives you the strength to disregard what's going on in the external and rely upon your inside world. So your external world is something you can't control, right? It's, you might be able to influence it to some degree, but in essence the only thing you can control is yourself, your body, your mind, your emotions, and your sense of connection. So through working on yourself and getting to know yourself, you're actually setting the stage and setting yourself up for being reliable, being there for yourself. Obviously, when in 1960 Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was sitting with those who were dying and came out with the realization that the most beautiful people we know have known defeat, suffering, pain, struggle, loss, and have found their way back out of these depths. That is when we realize that, yeah, out of this misery that we experience actually can come something magnificent. Out of the mess you feel you're in emerges your message, and out of your experience of life, hard as it may be, may come wisdom that someone else can use. Most of all, loss always means change, as I said in the beginning, and change that we didn't choose in the first place. But when we're able to do pattern recognition in how we deal with our emotions and how we realize in what stages we are actually in while going through that grief, it enables us to be clearer, be more gentle with ourselves, be kinder to ourselves, and sort of realize that we all live with some unattended grief. And once we get there, we may be able to stop being so hard on ourselves. And that is the final thing I wanted to address today, is the realization that heartbreak and grief are actually the same thing, and that more often than not, heartbreak as well as grief is a certainty in life. So the way we deal it, the better we know ourselves, the better we are able to heads on tackle what is presented to us on a silver platter and make it a gold platter through the growth that we acquire after the 5 stages, and then finally the 6th stage of creating out of that something new. The side note that now I want to address is that it is imperative to touch this topic because, like I said, we all live with some unattended grief. And some grief is unattended and pressed down because we tend to think that we compare and therefore need not address something anymore because there is the opinion it's less important, it's less big. So I think some of us may have been in the same situation I have, where, oh, I've met someone and after a month they ghosted me. And then, oh, my friend tells me, what are you going through? That is nothing. A friend of mine just ended a relationship of 5 years. Imagine how she's feeling. I get that notion and I subscribe to that notion. And I thought, how silly of me, thinking that something like that needs to be grieved about, or that I am entitled to linger on that and feel sorry for myself, right? But years later, I've first of all come to terms with the fact that this situation doesn't need to be compared, because your loss, and no matter what you're grieving about, no matter what it is that you lost, it is your own, and it is as vivid and as important and as intense as every other person's grief they're experiencing, no matter if the relationship is that of 5 years or an infatuation that ends after a month of just being left and rejected, right? Therefore, comparison is the death of creation. Never compare your own grief to that of others. Never compare someone else's grief to your own. It is individual, it is unique, and we need to honor that and respect that. If you feel drawn to the concept of what I'm describing here, you might find it interesting and want to research podcast episode number 4 called Sonde, a very beautiful excursion of this new coined word. So if we realize that these 5 stages actually end in a 6th stage of creating something new, meaning that loss and grief, even if we don't want it, come with change that can result into something very beautiful and very special. And if we leave the comparison of our own grief and what happens to us out, and if we say we're not doing the comparison game anymore, then there is one last thing to think about. And here comes in my personal experience as well as Matthew Hussey's video, which, in all honesty, brought me to tears, and I'm actually feeling very teary as much right now recording this because I feel it is a core challenge within humanity and within every one of our heads. Really, it's about the voice in our head. It's about asking us, why is it that although we are the ones that are in the longest relationship with ourselves, we are still also the ones that have abandoned us more than any other person has ever abandoned us. We're abandoning ourselves on a daily basis, aren't we? We're judging ourselves in our head. We are shaming ourselves. We are putting ourselves down, criticizing ourselves. We're telling us we're unworthy, unworthy of recognizing our emotions and pain and hurt, unworthy of sitting down, sitting with them, of analyzing them, of giving us space and time and investing energy into ourselves to see what is there and why it's there. Pain is difficult to overcome. We all have our strategies and our coping mechanisms to numb ourselves, to escape, to avoid triggers, to run away. Yes, it is hard to confront our pain. And yet, most of it comes from realizing that it is hard because the voice in our head makes it hard. There is a difference between feeling for yourself and feeling sorry for yourself. Because feeling for yourself is caring about yourself. It is seeing the worth of yourself and is showing up for yourself. It is, in a way, the same as when a friend sits with you and you are able to tell them how you feel and what you're going through, and they have that nice, kind voice. They listen to you, they see you, they understand you, and in doing that, they enable you to get out of that mode of feeling frozen and helpless and move again. It energizes you. It makes you see yourself through their eyes, even though you might not believe them in what they see for that moment, in that space of time where they're there for you, making you feel seen. They give your energy. And I ask myself so many times why it is that instead of doing that for myself, I rely on that voice that is telling me that I'm just feeling sorry for myself. In saying that we're feeling sorry for ourselves, we state that we have a lack of accountability and ownership. We are stuck in there, get bitter from there, and we're not doing anything about what bothers us. And that is the challenge with feeling sorry for yourself. But feeling for yourself is self-care and is self-love, and it is what makes friendships thrive. It is what our loved ones do for us. Why can't we do that for ourselves? Maybe we can do that for ourselves. Maybe we can start to nurture modeling that kind of voice that makes us feel seen and understood and worthy for ourselves, for internalize it as our own. Maybe that is what grief is about too. Grief is about change. It is also an invitation to adopt a kinder, different voice for yourself. And if nothing else, then I hope that you can take away from this episode just one exercise. Nurture an inner voice that is kind and gentle and loving. Nurture that voice of your most beloved person in your life, the way they use it when you open your heart to them with your challenges and your pain and your hurt. And then you're there for yourself, and then you show up for yourself. And then no matter how difficult your pain becomes, that voice helps you to overcome the strategies and turn these coping mechanisms, these patterns, into something beautiful, into a different kind of person, the kind of person you really want to be. The voice inside your head that is resembling the light that is within you, because you are worthy and you are so needed in this world. Your light is so special. No one, not one single person on this earth of the 9 billion people is you. And each and every one of us has something so unique, so unimaginably important within them. So if you listen to this podcast episode, I do hope it was of service to you in some way. Please know that you're loved, that you're seen, and that from my little corner of the world, with my heart wide open, I send you all the love in this world. Thank you for listening. Thank you for working on this beautiful project that is you. All the love and light, my beloved fellow healing integrating